All right, good evening, everyone. Jacob, are we good there? We got Zoom and Facebook going? You're working it? Okay. You know, as kids growing up, many of us were fascinated by the superheroes featured, whether it was on television or the comic books, whether it was Superman or Batman or Spider-Man or Captain America or Dick Tracy, or my all-time favorite was Popeye. They each had their own unique superpower, and the creators of these superheroes would come up with, this one could do this and this one could do that. You try to figure out what's the difference between Superman and Batman, what could Batman do, what could Superman do. We all dreamt about leaping tall buildings in a single bound, or going through Gotham in that Batmobile with all the cool gadgets, which, by the way, probably the Tesla has now anyway. But as kids, you fantasize about all these special powers, and the kids play games amongst themselves as if they have these superpowers. But then at some point, we grow up, maybe. And we realize that all those cool fantasies are just that. They're just fantasies. And that there's no Superman who can really fly up in the sky and stop bombers in the flight. And there's no Batman who can beat up 1,000 guys, bam. And Wonder Woman is not coming to rescue you as much as you want her to. So if that's the case, who will save the world? Where do we find real heroes? Not the fantasy ones, but some real ones. Well, for one thing, there are in fact all types of real life heroes among us. You look at the incredible courage and sacrifice of police officers and firefighters and first responders and nurses and members of the military who literally devote their lives to helping and to protect and to save others, and many of them putting their own lives at risk. And so yes, there are real life heroes, whether it's in this country, whether it's in Israel, all over the world. People who display true courage, humility, sacrifice, integrity, compassion, devotion, loyalty to something greater than themselves. People that deserve our ultimate gratitude, our reverence, and our respect. So there was this U.S. Navy admiral, his name was William McRaven, and he wrote a book, and it's called The Hero Code. And he has this theory that there's a reason why we're all enamored by heroes. And he suggests that there's really a hero within all of us. There is the part of us, part of our DNA, perhaps part of our soul, that wants to do heroic things. That we want to explore new worlds, or nurture lives, or save lives, or inspire people, or make people happy. Things that make a real difference. Now, for some people, they have the skill to go ahead and do so, and for some, it doesn't come as naturally. But what he says in his book is that the desire is there. It's within each and every single one of us to want to be a hero, to want to make a difference. So how do we tap into that? If we are to believe that indeed it's there, that it's somewhere within our soul, how do we bring it out? How do we find our own inner hero? Well, step one is that when we see or we hear about people who act heroically, we should try to mirror some of what we saw within our own lives. Even if it's in a small way. If we're touched, if we're moved, if we're inspired by the action of someone, then try to find some of that attribute and include it in yourself. Now, if you think about Jewish history, and we're standing days before the holiday of Purim, all of our holidays have those heroes. And what do we do on our holidays? We tell the story. We repeat the story. We read the Megillah. We read the Haggadah. What we're doing is we're telling stories about heroes. Why? The reason we do it is because we want some of that to rub off on us. We want to make it personal. We want to find the Queen Esther within us, so to say, the Mordechai within us, the Maccabee within us at different times of history. We want to find the Moses within us. So we look into these stories of these holidays, and when we celebrate the holiday, we're actually reliving the experience of these heroes, but we're to try to mirror some of that and incorporate it into our lives. Now, what's so impressive about our holy heroes is that they didn't lead or teach for personal gain or fame. In fact, most of them, the story tells us, tried to run away from it. Most classic, Moses. He wasn't looking for this. He didn't want this. He said no when he's met at the burning bush. He continues to argue with God, not me, not me. Esther wasn't looking for fame. It came upon her. All of our heroes weren't running for office. They didn't put their name into nomination. They didn't get up and say, I'm the best, vote for me. In fact, they did the very opposite. There was this sense of humility about them. And yet they all had that greatness to share with the world and to share with the rest of us. We all have that unique gift within us, our own innate greatness. Now, I'm not suggesting that everyone here is a Mordechai or an Esther or a Moses, but there is a touch of that within us. There is that spark within us that we can be inspired by their characteristics and by their ethics and by their actions, that they held nothing back in the challenges that they faced, so that we can find that in the challenges that we face. When you look at the focus and the approach and the impact of the Lubavitcher Rebbe's leadership, of what he did in his lifetime, and you realize it was never about his heroism, but it was about the heroism that he can inspire others to be. That was always his focus. One of the Rebbe's initiatives when I was a kid growing up, and it still goes on today, was called Tzivos Hashem. Tzivos Hashem literally means the army of God. And what the Rebbe organized was a kids club. It turned into becoming now the largest children's Jewish club in the world. Tzivos Hashem. But I remember when it began, the Rebbe encouraged the idea that we each climb ranks. And we climb from a private to a lieutenant to a corporal. We keep climbing ranks, and the way we climb ranks is we do mitzvah, we do good deeds. And this became an office in Crown Heights called the Tzivos Hashem office, and they organized these competitions and these contests, and you became a 1-star general and a 2-star general. And it really grew, and it started to spread from city to city and then from country to country to the international office that it is today called Tzivos Hashem. See Kids, See Teens, all of these came born out of what started as Tzivos Hashem. And what the Rebbe was framing us children is in this idea of military heroism, that you can serve to battle evil, so to say, by doing good deeds. And you can go on missions for the commander-in-chief for God. So when this was starting, they would give out, remember, these general hats with stars. If you were a 2-star general, you had 2 stars in your hat. And we would actually wear it walking in the streets of Crown Heights with great pride. We would have the patch, the military patch that were part of the army. We took great pride in this. Now, back then at Farbrengens, if you've ever seen the picture of the Rebbe at a Hasidic Farbrengen, right? So you've seen those elderly people sitting behind the Lubavitcher Rebbe, right? The Rebbe sat on a chair at a long table, and most of the crowd was in front of the Rebbe on these bleachers that would spread off to every single corner of the synagogue, I should say to every inch of the synagogue. So the kids, many of them would hang out under that long white table. So you see in the picture, you see the long white table? Well, under the table there was space, right? There was very little space in the rest of 770, but there was space. So you're literally sitting on the floor, the Rebbe's feet are there, and you're under that long table. Well, you got a good box seat there, right? So a lot of these kids of the Tzivos Hashem Club were underneath this table during the Rebbe's Farbrengens. That's where they would hang out. Now, one time, they're kids. There's some noise going on coming from under the table. Now, understand, the Rebbe is speaking to the world. And you got these kids arguing under there, and there's noise coming out. So one of the white-bearded fellows from behind the Rebbe comes closer to the table to shh the little kids, saying, you got to cut this out. This is not the place for it. You know, if you want to do this, go outside. And that caught the Rebbe's attention. And the Rebbe says to this fellow that tried to shush the kids, the Rebbe said, you are a civilian. They're officers. You got to be careful. You can't tell officers what to do if you're a civilian. Now, he said it with a smile, but at the same time, the Rebbe was making a statement of these kids are important to him. Let them be. Let them be. I can handle the noise. I can handle the chatter. I want them close to me. That was education. That was the wisdom of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, that he wanted to cultivate these kids into believing they can be heroes from a very, very young age. Now you can ask, what happened to all these kids of this Tzivos Hashem? What happened to the soldiers in God's army? Where are they today? I'll tell you where they are. They're all over the world. Thousands of them have spread forth to open Chabad centers throughout the globe, to bring Jews back to their roots and to help them with their issues and to illuminate the world with Torah and goodness. You see, the Rebbe started working and drafting them as they were young kids, convincing them, you, 6-year-old, 7-year-old, 8-year-old, you can change the world. I want you to believe in yourself, that you can be a hero. This is all you need to do. This is the manual. And they grew up with this mentality of they can change the world. And so when they go out to the oddest places in the world, they're not intimidated by the world. You often ask, where do they get the training from? They were raised this way by their commander, so to say, and they're not intimidated because they're in the army. And rule number one for the soldiers, you don't be intimidated by any of the forces that you face. You go out and you face the challenge. So from being soldiers in this club, the Rebbe's program encouraged us from a very young age to do outreach work. When I went to Boston, Massachusetts for 2 years of yeshiva there, Rabbi Herschel Volosov, my Rosh Yeshiva, gave me and my classmate Levi Krinsky the task of running the Tzivos Hashem for Boston. Now, I was just post-high school year, and he wanted us to manage this club that was taking place in New York, but to take care of Boston. Not just in the yeshiva that we were in, but for all of Boston. We didn't have a clue how to do any of this. But we started. We called up schools. We called up principals. Can we come and make a presentation? Can we do a rally with the kids? Can we do a competition with the kids? And that's when I first began public speaking, was during that year. I didn't go to any course in public speaking. Never studied it in any university. I just started doing it because I was given the task of opening up this club in Boston. That's how the world of Chabad was built. By the Rebbe encouraging everyone from a very young age that you can change the world, that it's within you. Of course we're not Mordechai's and Esther's out there, but learn from Mordechai and Esther. Take what you can from them and be the best Mordechai and Esther that you can be. Be the best Judah Maccabee that you can possibly be. Another message that the Rebbe sought to convey to all of his followers was whether they would make Jewish education and outreach their full-time work, or they would look for some occupation, some vocational occupation. What the Rebbe taught us was don't underestimate the infinite value of a single mitzvah performed by even one Jew. Understand its value and understand that it has cosmic implications. One small deed done anywhere in the world can change the entire world. So there was this Chabadnik who, although was in the business world, he was a stamp collector. But wherever he would go, he would meet Jews, he would take his tefillin along and try to encourage a fellow Jew to put on tefillin, talk to them about Judaism. He was a dealer in rear postage stamps. He would often travel and go to stamp shows. He would set up his own collection and sell, but he would also view the other stands and buy. One of the other fellows at this particular stamp show that he would often go to was an elderly Jewish gentleman by the name of Robert Trenkel. And Robert Trankel was more of a secular Jew, but a friendly fellow, and the two became friends. The fellow from Crown Heights, his name was Yitzchak Nemes, and Yitzchak Nemes and this Robert Trankel become friends. During their conversations, they would often talk about Judaism. He would encourage him to put on tefillin, he would, but there was limitations as to how far he would go. The early 1980s, Mr. Trankel travels with his wife to Brussels, Belgium for a stamp show. While in Brussels, they were involved in a terrible, tragic car accident. And Mrs. Trankel lost her life in that accident. He returned home a broken man. He became very depressed over his sudden loss, over the sudden change in his life. And in the weeks that followed, his acquaintance, Yitzchak Nemes, would visit him quite often. He felt pain, he felt his pain, and they would just try to encourage him, come back to work. You got to put your mind into something. You got to put the life back together. He would try, but to no avail. During one of his visits, Yitzchak puts forth this idea to him. He said, look, right now, when your wife was alive, I understood she did the cooking for you. But now you're going to have to learn to cook yourself, which means you're going to start something from scratch. If you're starting from scratch anyway, why don't you kosher the home? I'll help you get it kosher. And you'll start keeping a kosher kitchen, and you'll do this in your wife's memory. At least you'll be able to do something and feel that you're doing something in her memory. At first, Robert was open to the idea, and then he said that, it's going to be so difficult as it is to learn how to cook. I don't need now extra headaches in trying to figure out how to cook kosher. I'm not familiar with it. So he backed off. So Nemes says to him, I have a better idea then. What if I was to bring you ready-made kosher meals? I will have some yeshiva students come and kosher your kitchen. And every Thursday night, I'll come to your home with 7 prepared kosher dinners for the week. He knew this place called Schreiber's. In the olden days, if you used to go on an airplane, they would actually serve meals. Do you remember that? They would come by and they would serve a meal if you flew from here to New York. And there was kosher meals that were served. Now you only get it on the international flights. But Schreiber's was one of the big names in preparing the kosher meals on the airplane. He knew where their factory was, and what he was offering was he would go there, he would purchase 7 such dinners, and he would bring it to Trankel's house Thursday night and shine, you have kosher food for the week. So Trankel says, Nemes, I don't want to bother you, have to schlep and buy and bring and deliver, just leave it be. And he said, no, I think it'll be good for your wife's soul. Let's do it. Let me do this mitzvah. It'll be my mitzvah, my gift to you. And after much arguing, he agreed. Now, it really wasn't close to Nemes' house in Crown Heights where Schreiber's factory was. It was a schlep. He didn't have a car. So he would take a subway to Schreiber's, pack up 7 meals, and then travel to Trankel's house. It would take him another hour to get there, bring the meals, and then he would have to get home. So Thursday nights, he would first get home at 11 p.m. He would go from work, buy the meals, train to bring it and back home. But he felt very good about it. This was his mitzvah. He was being that hero right now. He felt good about himself. His wife understood and supported it, saying, you have to do what you have to do. If this is your feeling, what you have to do to help your fellow Jew, then go ahead and do it. And this went on for some time. Every Thursday night, travel to Schreiber's, pick up 7 meals, deliver it to Trankel's house, take the subway home. Years passed. Robert Trankel passed away. Let's fast forward. There's a knock on the door of the Nemes residence. Nemes' wife, Mrs. Zelda Nemes, answers the door, and there's this college kid there. And he introduces himself. My name is Steve Trankel. I'm a student at the University of Pennsylvania. I came here because I wanted to meet the family that fed my grandfather's dog for all these years. And she's staring like, what did you just say? You said your last name was Trankel, and you wanted to thank the family that fed, did you say grandfather's dog? He said, yeah. You were the ones that sent the kosher food packages to my grandpa, right? And she said, yeah, that's my husband. Well, I'm the grandson of Robert Trankel. Now, those kosher dinners that your husband would bring, they were very salty. And he didn't like the salty food. But he didn't want to say anything to your husband, so he would feed it to his dog. And he never wanted to say anything because he didn't want to hurt his feelings. So all those years, and Zelda's thinking, what? My husband schlepped. My husband gave up Thursday nights for years. Forget about the money, the time, the effort, and the emotional feelings that he had of a high, that he was helping someone. And then all of this, he was feeding a dog? Is this dog keep Shabbos now too? How holy of a dog is this? And she's putting on the smile to this kid from the university in Pennsylvania, but she's steaming inside. She doesn't know how angry she could be at a man that's dead, but she's very angry. So while this is all playing out in her head, the young man continues and said, to think that someone would go through all that effort to help another person. He didn't grow up with him. They were acquaintances because they each had a stamp booth near each other. And he would go out of his way as a grandson. I felt this was so unbelievable. I never saw anything like that. To have such a dedication to your beliefs, to believe that it's important for someone else that you sacrifice your time, that's what I saw. And so I always wanted to meet the family that did this. Because I want to know who you are, what you represent, and why there would be such a commitment to something that you would sacrifice such a great deal of time. More so, what I really came here to find out is who I am and what I should be doing. And from that point on, Steve Trankel became a regular visitor to Crown Heights and to the Nemes home. He would come every single Shabbos. And he would eat the food, not feed it to a dog. So all that food that Yitzchak Nemes schlepped to Riverdale to deliver to a dog actually went and nourished the neshama, the soul of his grandson. Because he witnessed that type of heroism, and it affected him. Today, Steve Trankel goes by the name of Shimon Trankel, and he lives a Torah-observant life in Israel, and he and his wife are raising an entire new generation of engaged Jews, all thanks to the food that was fed to his grandfather's dog. So what we may think is a waste of time and a waste of energy, people notice dedication, people notice devotion, people notice commitment, people are inspired by it. So when they see you schlepping to do a mitzvah, they're taking notice. You may not know they're noticing, but they see it and it affects change. The point is that no mitzvah ever goes to waste. Even if it didn't accomplish what you set out for it to accomplish, the goals that you thought it would do, it did not bring, trust me, it doesn't go to waste. Every act of goodness, every mitzvah performed since the beginning of time remains embedded within this world and continues to work its magic and shine its light across the divides and space. There was a science teacher in a Jewish girls' high school. We'll call her Mrs. Horowitz. And she loved showing her students the connection between Torah and science. She understood science well, but she always wanted to show that there's no conflict between the two, that Torah and science do come together. And she would develop these relationships with her students, and at the end of the year, she had this strange tradition. She would write each of her students a personal note. So not just give out the report card, but she wrote them their own note in an envelope and she gave each student. She did this every single year and she would spend hours and hours. She would want to make it personal. She would want to reflect about her relationship with this particular student. Her husband, who was also a teacher, would often argue with her, saying, "You put in so many hours into these notes, year after year after year. You know, no other teacher does it in the school. You give out the report cards, you write a little comment on the 2 lines that you have on the report card, and that's it. You got to write full letters." This is before computers where you can just type it up. Everything was handwritten. You're wasting your time. And they would have this interchange every single year, and sometimes Mrs. Horowitz would herself wonder if maybe her husband's right. Maybe it's a lot of wasted energy. Years later, a letter arrives at the Horowitz home that settles the issue. It was from a former student of hers. And she writes, "Dear Mrs. Horowitz, at the end of the year, you wrote each girl a note and you stapled it to our report cards. I remember opening that envelope and reading what you had taken the time to write to me. Incredibly, every girl in the class felt the same way I did. We all thought, wow, this is personalized." I kept that little pink envelope with me throughout all of high school and throughout all of seminary. And at any time that I needed a boost of confidence, I opened up your note and I read what you wrote to me. And this is what you said years ago. You said, "Dear Rachel, I get so excited when I think of the tremendous potential you're blessed with. Please continue to use your special talents towards your learning and growing in your mitzvot and good character traits. Don't be satisfied with mediocrity. Be the best you can be and go for the gold." That little paragraph has stayed with me. I have reread it and reread it. And then she writes, "I was in a terrible car accident, and for 8 months I went through this long recovery process that required me to lie on my back at all times. Just breathing caused tremendous pain. Every hour seemed to crawl, and it took enormous strength just to pull through a day. So how did I make it? I read your little note every morning. I got up, I did my Nagelwasser, I said my Moda Ani, I said my morning prayers, and I read your note to me. I just wanted you to know." 49 words, that's how many words were in that note. And it had this effect for years on a young woman's life. Mr. Horowitz started writing letters to his students after that letter came. See, acts of heroism are not just of the warriors or the first responders, the great rabbis. And they don't necessarily come in moments of extraordinary valor. For most people, it comes day-to-day acts of giving, of caring, of reaching out. Simple acts. The mom who holds down the job and finds the energy to come home and be present for her children. The dad that works hard all week but yet finds the time Sunday to take care of Little League or Basketball League to be with his kids some extra time. There's heroism in the day-to-day. The adult child that has to look after ailing parents. No one sees, no one's giving awards, but it's heroic. The friend that cares about someone else is in pain and he gives a sympathetic ear or a caring heart or a supportive shoulder to someone in need. That's heroic. Teachers can be heroes to children, as the story I just told, by seeing a child struggle and going that extra length to find out what's wrong, what's going on in your life, and how can I be of help. What makes these acts of devotion and sacrifice all the more heroic is that there's no large crowds with banners to say thank you. There's no parades going down Fifth Avenue with the ticker tape. There's no medal that's going to be pinned on your lapel. The only prize you get is the satisfaction of knowing that your actions helped someone else. And oftentimes you don't even know that part. That's true heroism. I want to tell you a story about Claire Schneider. Claire Schneider was single for many years. And she started coming to terms with the reality that she would probably never get married and she would never mother a child. When her twin sister Adele lost her husband, Claire moved in with her to help her raise her son during those difficult times. But still there remained this deep void within her as she yearned to nurture a child of her own. So after much thought and contemplation, she decided that she was going to retire from work and she was going to foster a child. She was going to sign up to be a foster mom. But she didn't want a typical child. She specifically wanted to raise a child with disability or with special needs. That's what she wanted to do. One day, Claire heard of a baby boy with spina bifida who had been born to a Hasidic family in New York. Now, in those days when this story takes place, children with disabilities were viewed in certain communities as a source of embarrassment for their families. There was this stigma that was attached to having a child with such conditions, and many parents would hide these children from the community or put them into institutions or offer them for foster care. So when Rabbi Avram Freund's son Rafal was born with spina bifida, he and his wife worried that this would tarnish the family's reputation. It would affect the lives of the siblings. So they wanted a religious home that would care for their child, but not here. That's when Claire Schneider stepped up. She took this little baby boy from the hospital and she treated him as if he was her own child, loving him, giving him the attention that he needed. And although her own religious background, she was religious, but it followed more of what we call the Litvish traditions. She was sensitive to the fact that the Freunds were more Hasidic, so she would check with the father, the kosher symbols, what hechsher do you like for your son? And when it came to the haircut, she waited for the 3 years. She made sure he had the payas like the rest of that family. Extremely sensitive to all. And she invited Rabbi Freund to be the first to snip his son's hair at the Upshana. She wanted there to be this family connection. Now, throughout those years, she lived in an apartment building. She lived on the 3rd floor. The apartment buildings in New York don't have elevators, which means she would carry Raphael up 3 flights of steps every time she would come into the house or leave the house. But she loved it. She wasn't ashamed. She took him shopping. She took him wherever she went. She took him to all of his therapy appointments, to his doctor appointments. She wanted to make Raphael as high functioning as possible, and she did everything in her power to help him learn and to help him grow. When Raphael was 7 years old, the Freunds made the bold decision. We want to bring him home. We want him to be part of the family. And they, with respect, informed Claire of their decision. She was saddened by the fact that this boy that she had become so attached to was going to move out, but at the same time, proud of the Freunds for making this decision. And she supported it wholeheartedly. Of course, the visitations would continue. And Raphael lived with the Freunds until he passed away at the young age of 16 years old. Fast forward. When Claire Schneider passed away, we're now in June of 2013. Rabbi Avram Freund asked to speak at her funeral. And this is what he said. One would think that Claire Schneider left this world without any children. In reality, though, when she gets to heaven, she will realize that she has many children. Not just dozens, not just hundreds, but she has thousands of children. And the people at the funeral are confused. What is he talking about? How does she have thousands of children? And he explained. For many years, it was very difficult for people in our community to come to terms with having a child with special needs. Everyone was hyper concerned about the family's reputation. No one's going to want to marry into their family. They're going to think that it's part of the family gene. And so they would hide it. When our Raphael was born, we were ashamed of his disability. But after Claire, not just shamelessly, but proudly, took our son wherever she went and loved him the way she did despite his disabilities, we felt the strength that we can do the same. So let me tell you all what happened. You know that when Raphael turned 7, we brought him back home. That was because we were inspired by Claire. Claire did that to us. She changed our way of thinking, but it goes well beyond that. The first Shabbos that Raphael was home with us, I kept my eye on the clock. The services in our huge synagogue starts at 9:30. I was always one of the first ones to the synagogue. Not that week, no. I waited. I waited till about 9:45. Why? I wanted the synagogue to be packed. I wanted everyone to be in their place. I wanted to make that entry so that everyone would see me. And I walked in holding my 7-year-old son Raphael in my arms the way I would hold a Torah scroll. And yes, I wanted all heads to turn. I wanted them to see how proud I was that this was my son. I wanted to make up for the 7 years of shame that I didn't want to be known as Raphael's father. And so I walked slowly down the aisle of the shul, shaking my head Good Shabbos to everyone that was there, because I wanted them to see my son. I wanted them to see how proud I was of being his father, and that I would never, ever again feel the need to hide his existence. And you know what happened that first Shabbos? After davening was over, 20 kids would come over, and they asked, "What's his name?" And they would start playing with him and talking to him. And Raphael loved it, and these kids loved him. And he became popular in the shul. You know what else happened? A week later, a friend of mine whose wife had just given birth to a little girl with Down syndrome told me that they were thinking about an institution to put their daughter in. But after seeing me with Raphael that Shabbos, they decided we're bringing her home. And in the weeks thereafter, and strange things kept on happening. Children we never knew existed started showing up in shul. Children that were in their homes for years, children with Down syndrome and autism and cerebral palsy. All these kids we never knew because they were hidden away for years. Suddenly their parents were willing to acknowledge the existence of these special children. And these children were brought out of the woodworks, and they became part of the community. And they answered Amen in shul, and they sang the way they wanted to sing, but they were part of it. And the community embraced it. And the community started making programs for children with special needs. Stigmatized? What stigmatized? These children became embraced and loved in the community. And I want everyone to know that all these changes that have happened here over the last decade were all because of one woman named Claire Schneider. She enabled us to come to terms with our son's disabilities, and she gave me the courage to bring him to shul, which served as the impetus for other families to do the same. And it goes beyond that. As these children, including my late son, were suddenly appearing on the scene, I realized that they too need a Jewish education. And yes, it would be hard for them to join a regular school. So what did I do? I retired from my job. I opened a new school called Sharei Chemla for children with disabilities, so that they have a school of their own catering to their needs. By now, hundreds of children have passed through the doors of this school, and it's all because of one woman named Claire Schneider. So she did not leave this world childless at all. All the children who have benefited and continue to benefit from all the programs that has now started in this community, and it spread its way from community to community to community, are all Claire's children. One woman, one child, one action in one community, and the world is changed. It's not merely poetic to say, save one life and you save a world. It's real, it's true. We affect one person, it affects another, and affects another. Now, do you think Claire Schneider, this modest and unassuming woman, had the slightest inkling that her decision that I want to foster a child was going to change the world? I don't think she thought that way. She felt that for herself, this is what she needed. She was that private hero that became a very public hero. Indeed, some of our greatest heroes have been those unlikely heroes. You're familiar with the name of Oskar Schindler. You're familiar with the name of Chiyun Sugihara, Irina Sendler. These are not people that grew up saying, one day I'm going to be a hero. But history thrust heroism upon them to make that decision at that critical time. And they became those heroes. When the moment comes, they seized it. They stepped up with courage and convictions to save lives and to save worlds. You may have heard me before estimate that today, the amount of Chiyun Sugihara survivors that there are in the world is probably over 100,000. One human being, 2 Yankee stadiums filled with survivors. One person. He wasn't raised to be a hero. He wasn't dreaming about being a hero. He was a diplomat doing his job. The opportunity came. Will you save the lives of strangers, of Jews that need to be rescued? As Jews, our inner hero is constantly being summoned. No matter where we are in terms of how we express our Jewishness, sooner or later, we will find ourselves faced with situations where we can either stand tall and proud for our ideals, for our identity, or we could shrink into the background. Today, as much as ever, the Jewish people need heroes. We need heroes with the spine, with the backbone, with the courage to stand up for the principles we hold dear. Principles that the world depends on. Heroes that will stand up to anti-Semitism, wherever it is, whenever it is. Heroes who will stand up unapologetically for Israel, that Israel has a right to exist. We need modern-day Maccabees, ready to bring light where there's darkness. You probably heard that last week there was declared on Saturday was going to be a day of hate by different groups declaring their hate for the Jewish people. All across the United States, we got these memos, beware the day of hate. Now you could read these memos and say, oh, we got to hide. Can't go to shul this Shabbos, it could be dangerous. Don't walk in the street with a kippah on. You don't want to be identified. That's the very, very wrong way to battle anti-Semitism. The strongest approach is the shuls to be packed with people, the streets to be packed with Jews, walking proudly, unafraid, yes, with security and courage, but unafraid. That's the response. It happened to be last Shabbos in Crown Heights in New York was the C-Teen Shabbaton, where teenagers from all over the country came together in New York. They always celebrated Saturday night in Times Square in a public celebration of their Jewishness. And if you've watched some of the YouTube clips or wherever you saw it, you may have seen it, to see 5,000 Jewish teenagers dancing with yarmulkes on their head in Times Square on the day called Day of Hate. That's the greatest response. Was it 2 years ago when Hamas was launching rockets from Gaza into Israel's population centers? Of course, Israel has always banned the villain. And you see that all the time. Israel responds to some terrorist attack and all of a sudden Israel's the villain for responding. So there was rallies taking place throughout the country, throughout the world, Solidarity for Israel rallies to protest against anti-Semitism that started raising its ugly head in our country. And one of those gatherings was attended by about 25,000 people in Manhattan. And there was this writer, you probably have heard her name, Barry Weiss. She quit, but she was working at the time for the New York Times. And she delivered a speech called I Am a Jew. And it's gone viral ever since. But there's this powerful line that she says, and she says, the Jewish people were not put on earth to be anti-Semites. We are put on earth to be Jews. We are the lamplighters. Israel lives now and forever. Am Yisrael Chai. It was just one sentence of this powerful speech that she gave, and she's so right. Fighting anti-Semitism is not what we're all about. Unfortunately, it's a tragic byproduct of our mission, but it's not the mission. The mission is for us to be faithfully to our Torah, to our mitzvot, to stand proudly as Jews, to serve as a light unto the nations. And that's why it's so ludicrous if you hear so-called prominent Jewish leaders saying, take off the kippah. No, put the kippah on. That's the real response. You know, as disturbing, as upsetting as the upticks in anti-Semitism may be, and they are, when it comes to Jewish survival, and it comes to Jewish continuity, the statistical threat to our existence from outside pales in comparison to the damage and the destruction we are inflicting upon ourselves from the inside. The damage anti-Semitism does to us is nothing compared to what assimilation and apathy and the lack of education does to us. So what's the greatest response? Increase in your Jewish practice. Invite more people in. Be prouder Jews, more knowledgeable Jews. Invite another Jew to your Shabbos table. That's the greatest response we can possibly have. We are one nation, we're one family, and we cannot afford to lose even a single Jewish child, let alone generations of Jews to indifference, to ignorance, to drop off from Jewish life. So, getting back to what we started with, what would happen when the police commissioner of Gotham would need Batman to come to the rescue? He would shine the bat signal into the sky, calling Batman, calling Batman. Today we need to put that light to the sky and say, calling all heroes. We need each and every single one to be in tune with their inner hero and let it shine. There's this great Jewish folk singer. We had him out here twice. He's since passed away. His name was Moshe Yes. Anyone ever heard of Moshe Yes? He wrote one of his most famous songs is a song of Who Will Be the Zadie of Our Children. Very powerful song. Very well written, but the way he sang it was extremely moving. And he ends his song with the challenge of like, this generation had Zadies to remind them of Judaism, but who will be the Zadies of our children if not us? We need to step up to the plate. We are the Zadies of our children. We're the Zadies of the next generation. We got to be the heroes for them. Our Zadies and our Bubbies were our heroes. We looked up to them as the great heroic generation. Well, we need to be that to the next generation. I'll conclude with this story. Some of you have heard me tell it. I told it at your home gathering. One of those who went through the hell of the Holocaust was a man by the name of Chaim Shapiro. And he survived 4 concentration camps. Not to mention the ghettos and the horrors of the forced marches. At the start of the war, he had a beautiful family with a wife and 8 children. Within the span of a little over a year, he lost his wife and 7 of his 8 children without ever having a chance to even sit shiva for them. After the war, Chaim, along with his only surviving son, a son named Baruch, they were liberated from Buchenwald. And they wallowed then in the DP camps for nearly 3 years until finally in 1948 they gained passage on an immigrant trip and they arrived in Israel. What's taking place in 1948 in Israel? There's another war going on. So you escaped the Holocaust to come to Israel, and everyone's being asked to volunteer to fight in Israel's War of Independence, which was a desperate battle for survival against overwhelming odds. Without any prior training, Baruch is given a rifle, he's taught how to shoot, and he's sent off to war. Everyone's sons, that's what took place. Now Baruch distinguished himself in battle. He actually became part of Yitzhak Rabin's brigade. And he was good, he was a good fighter. He participated in breaking the Arab siege in Jerusalem. He was a brave fighter. One day while sitting in his little living room in Tel Aviv, Chaim Shapiro glances out the window and he sees what no soldier's parent ever wants to see. There's a delegation heading up the path to his apartment. They say that Chaim Shapiro opened the door before they knocked. They say that he never read the telegram because he knew what that visit meant. He knew the last remaining Shapiro son was gone. With regards to the funeral arrangements, Chaim Shapiro made one request. He wanted his son buried in Jerusalem. That's all he asked. The next day, mourners came to gather together with Chaim Shapiro from all over Jerusalem. They had heard the story that this man came with only one survivor from 8 children, and now his 8th child is gone. So they all came to the National Military Cemetery in Jerusalem to Mount Herzl. Few of them ever heard of Chaim before, but they heard of the story. And they heard of the tragedy, and they came to pay their respects. Yigal Yadin was the IDF chief of staff at the time, and he was standing shoulder to shoulder with Chaim Shapiro. What Hitler hadn't finished in the crematorium ended by the hands of an Arab bullet, the last Shapiro son. As the coffin was being lowered into the ground, a strange thing happened. Chaim Shapiro began to sing. And people thought that he lost his mind, and they understood. He can't handle the grief. Yigal Yadin puts his arm around Chaim Shapiro, tries to calm him, says, "I'll bring you some water. Do you want to sit down?" Chaim Shapiro continues to sing. The crowd had no idea what to do. They sing along with him. They're burying his son. What are we supposed to do? And Chaim Shapiro notices that everyone's staring and not knowing what to do. So he asks to speak. And this is what he said. "I have been through a hell the likes of which most human beings on the face of the earth will never be able to imagine. I lost more than 70 relatives in a little over a year, including 7 children, my wife, and my parents. I have no place to mourn them. I have no grave. They are ashes in the skies over Europe. And I don't know why they died. But this son," pointing to to Baruch's coffin, "this son, I know why he died. He died so we can have a home for the Jewish people in the land of Israel. And he has a grave in the eternal capital of the Jewish people in Jerusalem. And for this I sing." Chaim Shapiro finished speaking. He began to sing more, motioned to those that were near him to hold his hands as he danced around his freshly dug son's grave. If you were to visit Mount Herzl and you were to see a tombstone of Baruch Shapiro, and to remember this story, you can close your eyes and you can understand why the Jewish people can never and will never be destroyed. That if there's one irrefutable truth of history, it's that Am Yisrael Chai. Chaim Shapiro, Baruch Shapiro, they didn't grow up saying, one day I'm going to be a hero. They became heroes. They influenced, they inspired. True heroes. We each have that inner hero. We should never have to face the challenge that a Chaim Shapiro faced. But we should find that inner hero within ourselves and bring it out in any possible way in our lives, with our friends, with our community, with a fellow Jew, with mankind. And be that light unto the nations through our courage, through our deeds, through our actions, through our kindness. So, are there superheroes today? Yeah. I'm looking at them. Each and every single one of you. These are the heroes of today. This is our generation. Let's do something about it. Let's do something great about it. And let's change the world. Thank you very much for joining me.